Hi everyone, I'm here today with Susan Wilder. Susan is actually my voice coach and she's been just such an amazing mentor for me in my career. I was creepy and I took her bio from our acting studio's website. So Susan has worked on stage numerous times at the Lincoln Center Theater, regional theaters coast to coast in leading roles on primetime television, feature films, commercials, and has voiced video games and ebooks. Miss Wilder received her MFA in classical acting from George Washington University, is a proud longtime member of AEA, SAG-AFTRA, the Voice and Speech Trainers Association, and the award-winning Rogue Machine Theater Company here in LA. And I've seen Susan multiple times on TV commercially, and you just did a play reading with, was it Al Pacino?
Yeah, I got to do a play reading with Al Pacino. It was a piece about Tennessee Williams.
Okay.
And evidently he had a very, very close female friend that I played in the play reading. Yeah.
That's
amazing. It was a blast.
Yeah. So Susan's just had such an amazing career, and I just feel really grateful that you've been such a good resource for me in my career, because I feel like obviously you've walked through a lot of the things that I've walked through, including vocal training. So just a little context for everyone watching or listening. When I first came to Susan, it was because my acting coach, Aaron, the first time he met me, within like 5 minutes, he said to me, "You're not using your authentic voice." And I had no idea what that meant. And I was like 17, and I was like, I took it as an insult, because I was like, what? No, this is my real voice. And it turns out that I wasn't using my authentic voice. I was using a higher, more constricted and smaller voice. And so he referred me to Susan, and it took years of training with you to kind of break through that. And it's something that it's still, if I'm not really actively working on it, I'll slip back into those bad habits. And even right now with quarantine and I haven't been able to work with you, I notice like my voice is a little tighter than normal, but I definitely have gotten away from that smaller voice that I used to use. And it was just so interesting. I love psychology. I studied it at UCLA, and I just saw how closely linked our voices to our psychology.
Oh yeah.
You want to speak a little bit to that?
Well, it is your identity. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, we're not separate. It's a physical part of ourselves.
Right.
The sound, the vibration of the sound affects people. Mm-hmm. It's so bound up in us, and we think that we know who we are. And, you know, it's funny, I was doing a quarantine yoga class the other day, and the teacher said, tension is who we think we're supposed to be, and release is who we truly are. And I thought, that's a really good phrase. And it applies to the voice work. Yeah. Because mostly what we try to do in voice training is not to put something on top of you, but it's to take away all the tension and take away all the expectations and the false identities that we've adopted over the years, mm-hmm. and try and find what is truly there, who your uniqueness, who that really is.
Yeah. And what was so interesting to me as I got to that point in my journey with you.
With a lot of tears.
That's what I was going to say. It was a lot of tears, because the reason why we adapt these certain manifestations of our voice is because psychologically and subconsciously, we think it will serve a certain purpose. So for me, I used a smaller voice to indicate that I was not intimidating. And this is what a lot of females do. I'm not intimidating.
That's right.
I was literally bullied from girls from the time I was in preschool. Like, babies would bite me. And that's just like, has followed me. And I was bullied in elementary school. And that's something that, as my psyche was forming, I was like, okay, well, I want girls to like me. I want boys to like me. I'm just going to be this small little, like, nice, sweet Kirsten. And so I adapted this smaller voice that was not authentic. And so when we worked through that, the subconscious was seeing it as a threat. That's where all the tears came up, because it was releasing, as you said, a lot of trauma.
That's right. and what you thought was what you needed for survival. Those are all of our patterns from the past have to do with, I mean, fundamentally survival. How
Right.
am I going to not be teased, or, you know, you take it to the extreme, how will I survive?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that comes with some very false idea that invisibility is the best of all. It's like, what?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then
Absolutely.
nobody will hurt you if you're invisible. And that women have that so much culturally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I actually realized recently, as we were preparing for this video, I realized I studied this in my communications classes at UCLA. And actually, my professor, I was researching this, and I found research from my professor. He's like one of the leading researchers in this area, that it actually, when you talk about survival, our voices do have evolutionary underpinnings. So it is found that when women are ovulating and at their peak fertility, because of the hormones, it makes your pitch slightly higher. So like, it's so subtle that you wouldn't notice, oh, Kirsten's voice sounds a little higher right now, but evolutionarily and subconsciously we pick up on that. So that
Oh,
means
how interesting.
from
Yeah.
a mating aspect,
Yeah.
technically I'm more attractive. So that's
Yes.
why we're subconsciously, again, females are more attractive if they have a higher voice, because there's a greater chance that, just mating wise, she's more fertile.
Oh,
So
that's fantastic. I love that.
it was like full circle for me too when I was reading this, and it was literally my professor, and I remember we learned about this in his class.
Yeah.
And then there's a more conscious aspect of it. There's been studies showing that people are more likely to vote for a political candidate that has a deeper voice, because
Yes.
that asserts dominance. And so it is just these cultural aspects of society
Yes.
have set these roles up that we need to step into. And
That's right.
because deeper voices are associated with dominance, then people, if they hear a woman with a deeper voice, they're like, she's either not as feminine, or she's a bitch, or, you know, whatever it is.
Well, we have to, you know, one of the reasons why I loved meeting you and working with you is because you did remind me so much of myself when I was a young woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for many women, when you see yourself walking through the door and you think, if only I knew then what I know now, you know, part of the pleasure of being an older woman is that you can offer to someone like you some suggestions of how I handled that when I was your age.
Right.
And part of it is, you know, we have to not just in every movement, and this has to do with women's liberation, you know, quote, women's liberation.
Mm-hmm.
But Thatcher was the first female prime minister of England. So she did a lot of vocal work to make her really sound butch,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what she thought she needed. And think about Hillary Clinton and her pantsuits. You know, that makes her look authoritative. And when we break away from, I mean, we are absolutely involved in a patriarchal system. So that's our model. And when women try to be included in that male model by becoming like males, no one enjoys it. The women don't enjoy it and the men don't enjoy it. But we think strategically we have to do that. Now, as the decades have gone on, you know, we are starting to get models of females that aren't recreating the male form of authority and the male form of sound. So a woman who becomes a prime minister doesn't have to put her voice down like Thatcher did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now it's changing. Thank God it's changing.
Right.
You know, and your generation is doing a lot
Yeah.
to encourage these changes. And it has to do with, in the beginnings of voice training too, it had to do with, back in the early parts of the century, of the last century, voice training was sort of to help immigrant communities assimilate into the power base of America. So you wanted to sound like, quote, an American, which meant a white New Englander, right? And it's the same thing that's happening now. There's a voice to feminism. There's a voice to Black power. There's a voice for all of these things that don't have to be only one sound. In other words, the correct sound. Correct according to whom?
Right.
Those in power.
Yes, and it's the same thing with, with Black Lives Matter, how a lot of people are like, oh, I'm not racist. Racism doesn't exist. It's so much deeper than that. It's the systemic racism and our subconscious biases. And the same applies to voice and how we perceive other people with their voice and how we perceive ourselves and our voices. And when people say give women their voice back and give Black people a voice, there's a physical manifestation of that. And that's what I learned most working with you. And it was so liberating. And then that's part of why I wanted to do this video, because I just feel very grateful that my path and my journey as an actor led me to that point. But I'm realizing so many people, why would you go do vocal training if you have a normal 9 to 5? But how many people then are living trapped in a voice that's not their own? And again, it goes further than the voice. It was such a therapeutic process for me too, just releasing so many layers of trauma.
Well, I'm thinking about what are the books that are on my bookshelf? What are the titles? Like Change Your Voice, Change Your Life, The Right to Speak, Freeing the Natural Voice, The Need for Words. These are all titles not about sound like a well-educated person. It's not about affect anymore. It's about authenticity and expression. And when I started, very similar to you, I was a professional actress even then, but I had a very soft, very whispery kind of Marilyn Monroe thing, because I didn't want anyone to know how powerful I was, because then men would be threatened. And I was very pretty, and I wouldn't want to threaten anybody, other women either. And so I didn't have the voice I have now. So it came through in grad school, and so many people in my class at the Academy for Classical Acting in DC, they would break down. They would start weeping when they finally found what they truly sounded like. And I remember hearing a jazz player not long ago, an old, very famous jazz player, and he goes, it takes a long time to figure out how to sound like yourself. And that's what we do as vocal performers.
Absolutely. It's just like, at what point do you wake up and realize everything that's been put on you and handed to you your whole life is not necessarily who you are? And that's kind of the discovery and even just like the awakening that we're in right now.
But that takes great courage.
Absolutely.
It takes great courage. You had great courage to keep coming. I had great courage to see it through myself, because I didn't want that anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah, Susan has seen me at the lowest of my lows.
But you were able to change only by doing that. We cannot, if we're not willing to take off all the pieces of armor that we had on, you won't change. Like, absolutely. I don't want to let go of this piece of armor.
Yeah.
Well, you have to.
Again, it's all about releasing, and you can't receive with a closed fist. And so many of the times the things that we want are not coming to us because we're not willing to let go of those other things that aren't serving us anymore. So I say this a million times. I'm just so grateful for my work with you. And my question for you is, for someone that might be listening or watching this and they're not an actor, they don't have access to a vocal coach, what are some ways that they can discover their true voice if they're not using it, or discover that they're not using their true voice? And do you have any practical advice for that?
I think the way you can discover that you're not using your natural voice is any kind of pain or any kind of exhaustion. Because our bodies are made in such an amazingly brilliant way that, you know, they always take the example of a baby who can cry for hours and not get a sore throat because it's using its body really, really well. But if you're not breathing freely, then it's going to all get stuck here. And you were mentioning vocal fry, for example,
Yeah.
which is a very common thing with the generation. Now, every generation has its own way of speaking. Every group has its own way of speaking. It gives you community when you sound like the members of a group, right? And so kids in the millennium, my son is a millennial, you're a millennial, right? There is a habit or a common affectation that is vocal fry, and it just means like, oh, I'm so not interested. And, you know, I used to know when my son was tired of me, it would be like, hoodie up, you know, it's like a convertible in a car.
Yeah.
And that is the vocal fry too. I'm not going to invest anything, and I'm not even going to breathe deeply. I'm just going to use whatever air is right here in my throat because that's all I need, because it's life bores me.
Yeah.
And so it's a way to not invest. And it takes courage to say what you mean and be responsible for that. And a lot of people aren't willing to be responsible for what they think and feel. A lot of us don't even know what we think and feel. But the more you get in touch with that, the more you need your natural, your authentic voice to express your authentic feelings. And so when you come to that point in your life, you may not have come to the point where you need an authentic sound. I came to a point where I needed that. I wasn't that little whispery Marilyn Monroe. I wasn't that. And I finally bumped up against where I could go no further in my life without confronting that. You reached that same place. And, you know, it's funny, my teacher, Michael Kahn, is just this brilliant teacher of American theater. And he taught me Shakespeare. And I remember him saying one time, he said, remember that the fullness of the sounds is the fullness of the feeling coming through. So if you have big feelings, you must be able to release them. We had a very interesting thing. Oh, this is to go back to your question of how can people who are not actors sort of do some exercises. One really brilliant exercise was a teacher asked us to bring in a piece, just a few sentences of some philosophy that we thought was so sacred. And I'm not a religious person, but I was raised sort of generic Christian. And so something that I brought in was, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, whatever God means to you, right? But blessed are the pure in heart. And I remember when I first started reading that, I couldn't even speak that. It was like I was not worthy of speaking such an enormously beautiful piece of language. You know? I mean, that's amazing that I'm not even worth saying that. So find something that you really believe to be so true and say it with all your heart, and see if you have those little elements of, oh, I'm not worthy of saying this. Right? It's a really interesting exercise.
That's wonderful.
Because people cry. They will cry and their voice will tighten up. And singers know that when you're singing something sad, you can't start crying because then you can't sing. So often our emotions overwhelm us. And civilians, I call them, people who are not actors, have to find the way to speak through that tightening up due to emotion. But so do regular people, because you can hide behind either I can't really sing because you're laughing and you're tightening it up, or you feel like you have crossed swords here because you must not say it. You must not say what you really think, and it'll tighten it up. And when you release all that, you have to you have to be willing to know what your feelings are. You have to be willing to express them. And that's not easy.
Yeah. And that, honestly, visualizing that sword, because you've told me that obviously before, that helps me, because the more you become conscious of that you're not using your real voice, or once you become conscious of this work, then you can identify when you're doing that. So for me,
that's right.
I still have times where if I'm walking into an intimidating situation, or if I'm really stressed out, or I'm in some kind of confrontation, I feel my throat tensing up, because again, it's like that defense mechanism. Like, we're going to keep you safe, Kirsten, we're going to keep you safe. And it's like,
Yes.
you always tell me to say, just be like, thank you, I love you, like, let go. Because it's that little kid in you that's like, I need to help you, I need to say, and just for me, like, visualizing those swords and just putting them down is so helpful.
But also, you have to continue to remember that men and women have different experiences around this. You know, so much of the literature is especially focused on women. You know, I mean, Lear says about Cordelia, oh, her voice was ever soft and gentle, a good thing in woman. You know what I mean? An excellent thing in woman. Yeah. And that's from hundreds of years ago. And then there's a part in Winter's Tale, for example, where the king has just completely lied about the queen. She has died. And her servant woman comes in, she goes, how dare you kill the queen, blah, blah, blah. And the king is like, I'm an awful human being. And then one of the lords says to Paulina, the serving woman, he goes, you know what, no matter what he did, your tone of voice is really annoying.
Yeah.
I'm just pointing out that he killed the queen, and you're telling me that my tone of voice is inappropriate, you know?
Yeah.
So now, as we are starting to claim our voices, as women are starting to claim their power, you know, we're seeing all this literature which has held us into place. You know, think of all the fairy tales where the Little Mermaid, she gives up her voice. She gives up her tongue in the original. She has her tongue cut out so that she can be with that prince. And then she can't speak. So he thinks somebody else saved him, and she gets turned back into foam.
Wow.
You know, the fairy tales where the woman has to knit, her brothers are turned into swans, and she has to knit sweaters for them out of nettles and not speak. And it takes her 7 years. She sits up in a tree knitting with not being able to speak. It's so common.
Yeah. Even right now, have you seen The Great on Hulu?
No.
It's like loosely based around Catherine the Great. It's a drama comedy.
Oh yeah, great.
Yeah.
With Helen Mirren?
I don't know if Helen Mirren's in it. It's Elle Fanning.
Oh, Elle Fanning. That's right. Yes, I have seen the posters. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's great. This wonderful line in the pilot where the king's like, who told you can speak? You're not supposed to. Why is she speaking? And she's coming in and like challenging the status quo and like wants to make a school for girls. And but his reaction to her, and again, it's like a drama comedy. So he's kind of the comedic relief, and just, he's so ridiculously misogynist, but it was reflective of the time, still of the times. But yeah, I just love how literature and science, like I said, I was looking this up, it all supports it. And it's neither like right or wrong. I think we like to make rules in our society of like, this is how you should sound, and this is how, and it's just getting to that. It's not about having necessarily a deeper voice if you're a woman. It's just finding that.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. And you know, there's this book, it's an old paperback. It's called Change Your Voice, Change Your Life. And one of his exercises in that, which is so good, is just like a lot of people, if they're talking down here, we know that's not their real voice. It just doesn't fit the picture, right? And they are actually, you're pushing down on that. And so a really nice way to find out where your, what they call the basal pitch, the baseline, like, you know, if you're on a music, a page of music, you know, you have a certain place where most of your notes are, where your pitch is. And the way to find that out is to go, wow, oh, no way. I don't think so. You know, these little exploding things that will, because if you're talking down here and then somebody gives you a present, you go, thanks. It's like, no, that's really your pitch. Right. So you can find your pitch by just sort of fooling around with, hey, awesome, cool, yes.
Yeah, I love that. And you always used to make me do we call it the monster, where you're like, open. Because like for me, a lot of my problem, and a lot of women have this problem, is just constricting your throat. To open it up, it's like imagining like a cavern, and you're just like yawning through it, and you look and sound ridiculous, but just exploring through that and saying those expressions with the yawning action it helps too, if anyone, you know, wants to try that practically.
Yeah. There's one tiny thing that I think is worth everybody remembering, which is when you change anything about yourself, but very much particularly your speech, you threaten a lot of people that you're around. They think you're judging them because you're breaking away from, quote, who they always knew. Even if it's who you always knew to be a fake. It's who they knew. They've accepted that as your real self. And if you change that, you just have to get a little prepared for other people to say, that's not what you sound like. It's not what I have sounded like.
Right. Yeah.
But it is me.
Yeah.
And you have to be ready for people to resist that.
Because it threatens we all like to feel safe. Change scares everyone. And so if you're not staying in your little box that people have put you in, or how they've identified you, that threatens their world and how they see the world. And I mean, look at what's happening right now with the Black Lives Matter movement. The reason why there's so much backlash and resistance, I don't believe it's because there's so many people that are like inherently bad and outright bigots. It's just everything they've always known is being challenged. So there's a bit of resistance that's coming with that.
That's right.
Whether it's with Black Lives Matter or with finding our voice and allowing people to truly step into who they are, it's like if everyone can just put down their swords and realize that there'd be a lot more peace in the world. The reason why there's not peace is because there's not justice and people don't feel like they're being seen. So anytime, getting back to the voice, if you feel like you can't be seen, whether it's yourself, if you don't feel like you can step into that, there's that resistance. And that's why I would cry all the time when I was stepping through it.
It takes courage to speak out. You know, we see that all the time right now. You know, you have to speak out.
Yeah.
And especially women are trained, don't speak out. Let the men do that for you. You know, it's changing now, but still.
Yeah.
That's a legacy that we have to, on a day-to-day basis, reject.
Absolutely. And encourage people as they're stepping into that, especially as women.
Because
ironically might be women in your life that are questioning when you're making those changes. But we all have to, for the sake of all women, we have to allow ourselves to step into our authentic selves and encourage that, because that's exactly where not saying all men are this way, but like the misogynist, sexist men want us to all be butting heads against each other. And we could have a whole video about how, you know, culture sets women up to see each other as competition. And so, yeah. Well, thank you so much.
This was fun.
This was so much fun, and I'm just looking forward to being able to see you in person and work with you again. Because, like I said, my voice is starting to get a little, but I just really want to acknowledge you and who you've been in my life, and that you're sharing this wisdom with everyone that might be watching too. You've impacted my life so much, and I hope that anyone watching can see a little bit of that as well. So
it's absolutely my pleasure. Nothing gives me greater happiness than to watch, you know, people grow into their strength.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Susan.
You're welcome.
Soon.